Gentlemen, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to day 3 of the 16th Annual General Meeting of the BC Assembly of First Nations. On your agenda, you will see we have a busy agenda until our lunch, where lunch will be provided. So just walking through, we will hear from the First Nations Housing Council. We'll move to early learning and childcare. Gaming, the New Relationship Trust, the BC Infrastructure Benefits Corporation presentation. I see we have a health break on the agenda. First one that's appeared on the agenda since Tuesday. I suspect that might be a euphemism. And then we'll turn to the National Near Brotherhood for an update. And we did complete all the resolutions yesterday, and there were no late resolutions, and so we are completed that piece of work. And so we are, to a degree, in an information session this morning. And so as we have begun each morning, let us turn to Morgan Guerin, a councillor for Musqueam First Nation, to help us begin our meeting with the proper protocol. Morgan?
Siyam Nasiaya, dear friends and relatives, and Tlasetsaleno. Once again, I'm not sure if I have any new faces in the group, but I've been here for the last 2 days providing an opening welcome, a piece of protocol. My name is Morgan Guerin. I'm an elected councillor for the Musqueam First Nation, and it is indeed my honor to be here for the past few days providing these words of welcome. I've seen a lot of good work done here by a very large cross-section group of our people across British Columbia. Yesterday morning was actually quite exciting, listening to candidates speak with an open heart and an open mind, and actually speaking across party lines more about issues. So I was excited to hear candidates come in not pleading a vote for me, but the things we need to do together. And as our friend Jody spoke so eloquently about yesterday, leaning more towards our traditional form of governance based on consensus, which is the way I was raised with the government of our Musqueam people has always been. I also heard a lot about climate change, which I'm very excited to hear about. It's something that we need to not only address, but really work towards fighting this change. I am actually going to speak tonight at another gathering out at the Chan Center where David Suzuki and a few others are actually hosting a group of youth who are speaking on that exact subject. And if I can say something, my teaching of how and who we are, Huomo, and how we say it refers to a First Nation person, but the way it was described to me, it says, you belong to the earth. That connection that cannot be severed like a mother between a child, nor the responsibility, as we have all come to know. This is something that we all know. And what we're seeing is our settler relatives, their children, their youth, are saying the same thing. They take every Friday off, and they call it Friday for the Future. They take this day off to go and protest on their local parliament steps or their local assembly steps and say, this is a real thing that's happening and it needs to be worked upon. It's showing me a lot of promise, especially for this room, who are representing all of our nations as one family, saying the same thing, the same teachings that we have, and these youth are right on your tail saying the same thing, which gives me a lot of promise for the continuity of this change that has to happen. It is a generational fix. I'm very happy to see that it's burning bright behind us. So that said, I've eaten enough at the table for the last couple of days. So once again, in the words of my ancestor, Kaya Palano, as he said to the first European sails to these shores, On behalf of the Musqueam people, I welcome you to our traditional and unceded territory. Walk with that good heart you've had for the last few days. A lot of good work's been done. A lot of those resolutions with just minor changes. That says a lot. So, on behalf of the Musqueam people, welcome, Haitsepka. And to those I don't see for a while, have a safe travel home as well. We need to see you all here again. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Morgan. That was thoughtful and reflective and awesome, as you have been all week, so really appreciate that. You did remind me to remind you that there is, especially when we wrap up today in and around the lunch hour, that there is the youth climate strikes going on across the country, and so let's be a little bit extra careful in our drives when we depart this afternoon, because there should be a lot of youth around the city and around our communities being active on the climate challenge. So let us pick up on our first agenda item, BC First Nations Housing Council, which of course has been before you on a number of occasions, and they've been doing some significant work over the last year or so. And as you see, we are joined by Chief Dan George, the chair of the BC First Nations Housing Council. So over to microphone 6.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge the Musqueam territory that we're doing our business on today. And thank you for the opening, Councillor. I'll try not to bore you too long. First thing in the morning. So I'm just going to give you an update on what we've been doing in housing since our last update. So HIC continues to move forward on its path to establishing a new First Nation Housing Infrastructure Authority. We can continue to use our website, emails, engagement sessions, presentations as a way to keep First Nations informed, and our process is transparent as possible. We also needed to keep our websites updated because the federal government looks at our website just about every other day. So it's part of our transition into taking over services from ISK. On July 15, 2019, the legislation dissolved Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada and formally established 2 mandates of 2 new departments, Indigenous Services Canada, ISK, and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs came into effect. Through this act, ISK will support a holistic approach in the delivery and the quality of day-to-day services and support the path of self-determination of Indigenous peoples to control service delivery for their own people. So what that means is through legislation, ISK has designed to dismantle themselves. So we are taking over all their services. We met with Deputy Minister Jean-Francis Tremblay of Indigenous Services Canada, and he said he is 100% behind us on what we are doing here in BC. So we got the support from the federal government, and we will continue to move forward. HIC continues to amend and revise its framework agreement in partnership with Indigenous Services Canada. HIC is awaiting results, results of the federal election to finalize the framework agreement and ensure that next, perhaps, new government will own and respect the process. So we have a meeting in Ottawa next week with the federal government, and we continue to keep on pushing forward and with all their support. It does not matter if the government changes, we will still continue to move forward, whichever government comes in, because that is their mandate to dismantle ISK. So we're still in the key there, no matter which government comes in. HIC is awaiting results of the federal election to finalize the framework agreement. finalize framework agreement and ensure next government will own and respect the process. So when we had a discussion with Minister Tremblay, he mentioned to us, because we were thinking about the government changing also, and how that might affect us. So we're thinking of doing an agreement in principle before the government change, but Minister Tremblay told us that maybe we should hold off for a little while and wait till the next government comes in and then bring it forward and do the agreement in principle. So we're going to work on an AIP as soon as the government changes. Regardless of election results, HIC and a standing committee on infrastructure. So we're still trying to figure out the infrastructure issue there, because if you know, on every reserve, when you talk about infrastructure, everything on a reserve could be infrastructure. So where do we find that line? These committees bring together specialists and experts who will share and shape the new authority and help to obtain the full data required for our negotiations as well as the new authority. So we've been doing a lot of data gathering so that when we go to the government and we create the housing authority, we know what we need to ask the government for. HIC continues to collaborate with organizations, institutions, tribal councils, and communities. HIC has met with the Aboriginal Capital Committee, ACC, and discussed renewed partnership, as well as the need to call a meeting and bring together all interested organizations to the same table. We also work with ISK quite closely and developing that path to move forward. In our continued commitment to transparency, we are increasing the amount of information available regarding HIC activities, including our meetings with government and First Nations. This will help to ensure that everybody can follow along and that no one's left behind in the development of this authority. So I believe that our job as HIC is to make sure that all the information that we've gathered from all the First Nations in BC is put into that authority. And everything that we gather, that you people want, all people want in BC, gets put into that authority, and that's our job. We are not running the authority. We are not the authority. We are creating the authority. HIC announced 3 new council members who have recently joined. Stacey McNeil, who's the general manager for Scoutgale First Nation, and bringing extensive housing management expertise to the council. We've got Fran Hunt. She's our executive director of Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness. In our engagement sessions, we said we need to talk about our people that are off reserve. So how do we help them? So we've got Fran in there that works on homelessness. So it's a great asset to our Housing Infrastructure Council. And we need her expertise to figure out how do we work with our off-reserve members, and how do we put that into our authority. We've got Doug Bork, who's the Director of Aboriginal Banking for BMO, bringing extensive financial expertise to the council also. HIC is pleased to announce 2 new chiefs who have recently joined. Chief Donnie Van Somner from Quadacha First Nations. And I'd like to thank Greg Louie as our newest chief to our board. So if everybody give Greg a welcoming. HIC is now a diverse presentation from across the province. So yeah, we've got a diverse representation from the north and the south and Vancouver Island. HIC is revising its fall engagement plan and will soon be back out in the communities. Well, probably after the election. HIC is coordinating a housing infrastructure convention in early spring to bring together specialists, leaders from across the province to provide further direction on the creation of the new authority. Another thing we've done too is we've talked to UBC, and we've got the Souder Institute from UBC that did some costing models on the 3 different styles of authorities that we discussed with all the First Nations in BC, and how much it'll cost for having a central organization or having satellite offices or regional offices. So we're doing costing models on that. Is there any questions? Can you come up to a mic?
Thank you. And just as a note, Chief George, it was the gentleman who did say he had the ticket in his room. So you had somebody who... All right. All right, we will return to order. And back to Chief George.
Yeah, I'm just a hick from Burns Lake in the north.
Hello. I want to thank you, Dan, for your presentation. My name's Chris Alphonse. I'm proxy for Cowichan Tribes, and I really want to thank everybody for being here today, and thank Musqueam for hosting this. I just have a few questions. Is there an idea when the shovel is going to hit the ground for any of this, and can we cause more pressure on things to happen quicker because of all of the troubles that all the bands have in housing? It's a no-win situation. You and I know how bad the housing is because we both worked for CMHC before, so we know all of the troubles and all the tasks that, monumental tasks that all the bands need for housing. Pressure them to get us started right away, just for the overcrowding that's happened again because of CMHC has gone down to 10% of what they've used to build in the past 6-8 years. So that's caused more trouble to all the bands, and that was the main question: is when are we going to start building again, sort of thing.
Well, we're looking at within the next couple of years to create the authority, and then we'll probably have another couple of years to make sure that like I said, all the information that we're gathering from all First Nations, we got to make sure it's into the authority, and then as ourselves as the HIC Council, we're going to disband ourselves, so we won't be around forever, and so we're looking at about 2 more years. And another thing too is with the federal government, this hasn't been done before, so we're figuring it out together on how to do this. So at first we thought the federal government was stalling us, and they weren't working with us and weren't working in good faith with us, but we found out that they don't know how to do this either, so we're working together to figure this out. So hopefully in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Sorry. Yep. Also, is there any way we could have any mitigative measures, funding available, or pilot projects available in the works?
Well, we're doing a lot of the research and data gathering to so that we know what the amount of money that we need to create this authority, and we don't want to be shortchanged. So we're also working on a court case against the federal government. So we can have some leverage when we go and do our ask. We've got some leverage that we can access.
Tony at microphone 23.
Yes, good morning. Tony Morgan, Chief Counselor, Gidneyal Band. Thank you for your presentation, Dan. I just wanted to also wanted to see when the shovel was going to hit the ground, because with our band, it was in bad shape when I first got on, but we cleaned everything up there. Everything's paid off now. We don't owe any money, but now we have 120 application backlog, and we wanted to move forward on possibly apartment housing units that could meet the need of a lot of our members that want to come home. They live off reserve, but they want to move back to their own homeland. So we wanted to find a good entity to work with, and I was interested in your presentation because I wanted to see how we could move forward. And we just got through the planning session, and we want to get started on new houses. We just built other 5 units this year, and those were built all paid off right off the bat. So we want to move forward in that kind of way and not owing any money. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. We are still working on moving forward, and like we said, any input that you guys have on how you want to develop this authority, we're always open to it. As you can see, we have our website on the screen there. You can look at it and see what we're doing all the time. We're finding that we need to update it as soon as possible, because the federal government looks at our website every couple days. So even updates like this, they said, will be beneficial for them to update the ministers in the federal government. So we'll continue to update our website, and you can follow us on our websites.
Microphone 23, Willie.
Good morning. I'd like to also thank you, Dan, for your magnificent presentation. Housing is always a key concern in Gitchigooka and stuff like that. And we like hearing about the organization, in particular the Housing Authority. And one of the things I'd like to ask is how is it HIC is going to be maximizing the existing housing entities like BC Housing, stuff like that, because we're working with them too and they're starting to get on the reserve and stuff like that. And one of the things that we in Gitchigooka are doing is that we're just looking at expanding our reserve due to extensive overcrowding, and a lot of our members want to move home too. So we'd like to be more interested in what it is that HIC is doing and how that authority will be able to benefit First Nations such as us. And just want to also ask you to clarify about that call out that HIC made for regional, what it is that they're doing. So thank you.
Well, we had a call out for some directors, and we have a society too. So we need a few directors for the society that we established to run the finances through HIC. So we had a couple directors that are not feeling well, so they had to step down from our council. So that's the reason we put a call out. But we are still looking for a youth. I don't think we've had any names yet. So if anybody has a youth in your community that you want to join our council, we need the youth's voice there too. So if anybody has any youth that they want to be on our council, please put your names forward. Thank you, Willie.
Are there any further questions for the BC person? Back to microphone 24.
Thanks again. Just a question I had about your budgeting and as nations, if we had all our assessment management plans in place and given you all this information, that would probably help everybody out a lot, I think. And I think Cowichan's starting theirs, and there's funding actually to do those plans, but that's just a question that I had. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure questions, some of the biggest hurdles that we're going to come across, because like I said, infrastructure could be from one thing to everything on your reserves. So where do you define that with the federal government also? So we've got a lot of tough questions that we're asking ourselves that we need to solve also. Thank you for your questions.
Final question to microphone 19, Chief Spahan.
Election 1-1. Antlan Squash Lease Behind Cook Bevan Sletku in the Gotham Nation. Good morning, everyone. Lease Behind Chief of the Coldwater Band. I'd like to again thank Musqueam for allowing us to do this important work in their unceded territory. I understand that you're working with BC Housing, but are you also working with First Nations Market and Housing as well, too?
All right, let's take the question on microphone 11 as well, and then we'll get a response and final comments from Dan.
Wake Marianne Urama request proxy for Shuswap Indian Band. So do you come to the table with new resources, or is it the same minimal funding that we get from MISC?
Well, we're hoping to figure out some different finances, not like ISK runs itself now, but that's why we got BMO on part of our board. How do we make that fund grow, and how do we deliver it out to First Nations? But we need the answers from you guys. The answer comes from the people. So how do you want us to bring this out? And we will go from there. And the Market Housing Fund, I sit on the national board for Chiefs Committee on Housing Infrastructure. We have a meeting in Ottawa this next week. And so we've been looking at the Market Housing Fund that has not done what they're mandated to do, build houses. And they've been at it for 6 years, and they haven't even come close to what they're supposed to do. So we've been looking at that nationally, that maybe we should take it over too. So that's in our sights.
Any final comments, Chief?
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to the BCAFN, and if you want any other questions, I'll be just over here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. So thank you very much, delegates, for that. So again, in the discussions, really the emphasis is on how soon and how will First Nations see a difference in the housing and related infrastructure funding and stock, essentially. All right, let us make our transition to the early learning and childcare. I note that Deb Foxcroft, Director for the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society, and Karen Isaac, the Executive Director for the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society, are with us, and we'll ask them to join us at microphones 5 and 6, and we will proceed to that. If we could have their, I think there's a briefing note that they've provided that was circulated by the staff. And you're welcome to speak either. Yeah. Microphone 5.
Good morning. Good morning, Chiefs. Deb Foxcroft, Sishat Aksup, New Chonla Territory. I just wanted to acknowledge Musqueam for having us here in their territory and hosting us. And just want to say good morning. I'm the director, one of the directors of the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society, and was a founding member of the society over 20 years ago. And I had left there for a time when I was working in government, and now I'm back as a board member for the society, and happy to be here in these very exciting times. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yes, good morning, Chiefs and delegates. Happy to be here today, this morning. I'm here to just do a brief update on regional implementation of the First Nations Early Learning and Childcare Framework. Just so I think you have a handout, my understanding. So we're here to provide an update on the implementation of the First Nations ELCC framework to date, and to identify ongoing implementation and processes required to continue our leadership engagement and advocacy. Just wanted to say, in terms of the background, BCAFN has been mandated by First Nations leadership to be the coordinating body of the implementation of the First Nations ELC framework in BC, including providing leadership, oversight, accountability for $8.9 million in an annual funding from Canada to support ELC capacity development among BC First Nations. Just happy to say that, and very proud to say that BC, as usual, is leading the way. We are the first in Canada to be able to get such or go forward in leading this with government, and we're just happy that we're leading the way in ELC in Canada. This is the first agreement right now. So, just in the interim 3 years is about community development or community-driven investment strategy developed by the BCAFN, which began in 2018 and 19. It's been a short time frame, and so we've been working constantly to be able to get this implemented in a very short time frame. So it's designed to respond to the immediate ELCC needs of BC nations, and the areas of immediate need included the enhancement of the quality of IELCC services and supports, and also to increase access for First Nations families, and also building capacity for the IELCC sector. The diagram below this lists the key funding streams alongside with information from BC nations supporting and starting in 2018-19. Just excited to say that we haven't had any new resources in over 20 years. So I'm just really happy and excited that we're finally going to be able to invest the needed resources for our children and families. So below, in terms of the amounts that we got, as we said, we got $8.9 million for British Columbia. That was not, we actually kind of rejected the government's formula because we didn't think it was a fair formula for British Columbia because we have 203 First Nations. A lot of them are isolated or in remote communities. So we did kind of push back on that funding formula, but at the end of the day, we had to follow it. So in terms of the streams that we just got the funding out over the past 6 months, that's kind of been our priority. I'm happy to say that finally we have wage enhancements for our workers at the community level that are working with our children. As I said, they haven't had a wage enhancement for over 20 years, and so I'm excited that we're finally going to be able to support them that are looking after our children on a daily basis, our very important resource. So we got for year one was for 101 First Nations, dollars went out for First Nations wage enhancement, and also included 4 service agencies, and that was in the amount of $1,522,071. Year two, we're looking at investments of $1,750 million. Our other stream was in partnership development, engagement, and governance, and that will be year 1 and 2 of $750 and we'll talk about that later. We're also included for the first time, I think, is elder involvement. So we have for 100 First Nations and 4 service providers, 318,000 in year 2 eligible service funding and expenses will be put forward. And then community-led development planning, year 1 is 203 First Nations at $3 million. And numbers of, sorry, what that is, I'm not sure what that is, Karen, SORS. Statement of readiness received, and 89 nations have received those dollars. We also have minor capital and service funding, and the minor capital is $1,750,000 and service funding of $3,350,000. These dollars have gone out, majority? Some of them have. Okay, some of them have gone out already. And so our current status now is, well, the focus of BCAFN's efforts since March of 2019 has been on ensuring distribution of early learning childcare funding to nations and communities. It is critical and important beginning work and also commencing on developing constructive arrangements for effective First Nations partnerships and coordination. There's strong linkages with First Nations sectoral partners, First Nations Health, First Nations Education Steering Committee, First Nations Schools, Associations, Indigenous Skills and Employment Training, and First Nations Child and Family Services. Was called for by participants attending our leadership forum that was in May of this year. And which was organized by BCAFN, and as part of our commitment for ongoing engagement with nations, partners, and funders. A coordinated Made in BC approach is what we were hearing and getting feedback about, and also about one that is informed by research and data, which will ensure partnership development process are driven by evidence and guide investments in ELCC that allows for greater impact and will be reached and be transparent. So our next step for BCAFN is preparing for a second round of wage enhancement grants, and will continue to support nations, communities to develop their planning to access service grants, which will be made available during the fall of 2019, as well as supporting direct investment in First Nations communities. BCAFN continues to develop strategies to engage leadership, First Nations sectoral leaders and partners, as well as governments to develop a Made in BC First Nations ELCC investment strategy that will ultimately result in system development and reform in all the areas of ELC policy and program development, including funding and governance. Just wanted to say thank you again for the continued support from our leadership, and just acknowledge your support for the investment for our children and families, and continued support from you here at the table. I'm sure we'll be here again, and we will be looking at how we can engage with you in the very near future. Just wanted to say, I think that, again, acknowledge BC for their leadership. As Dan George said, in housing, the government doesn't know what they're doing when it comes to this, so we are leading the way. So I think that's really important in terms of decision-making and working towards what's going to be best for our children and families, which will include our culture, our language, and supports for those families. So again, Kleko, Kleko, and we look forward to meeting you again, and if there's any other questions, or if there's questions at the table, please ask them. And I'll just ask Karen if there was anything I missed. Karen's under the weather, so I took it over.
No, I think you've covered everything, Deb. I would like to let you know, though, that there is an information sheet at the back of the room that describes some of the investment streams in a little more detail. And just, again, just would like to encourage leadership to work with the programs in the community and the child care personnel to ensure that you get your proposals in. We received 89 statement of readiness. We still need to receive 100 more. So again, our office is also available to support communities directly to develop their plans. So as I said, there's an information sheet in the back to give you more information.
Questions? Microphone 24.
Hi. Crystal Tolme, Deputy Chief for the Gittimax Band Council. The wage enhancement, is there an application process for that, or how was the 101 determined?
Yes, there was an application process, and to be very honest, it was a very quick turnaround. We received 101 applications, and we were able to process those last year in March. We're in the midst of accepting more applications. I think the applications go online next week, on September 26th. And it's open to all the nations in British Columbia who have programs, both licensed and unlicensed, but who have certified ECEs in their programs.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Not hearing any. Me and Karen will be in the back sitting there if there's any, if you want to come to us during break or before lunch. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I don't see Chance either.
Might have to go to, I know Brenda's here.
Okay. We find ourselves in the unusual position of being early and not having our next presenter present. What I think we'll do then is I do note that Brenda Ireland and the Senior Advisor on Indigenous Relations, and Irene Cara, the President and CEO of the BC Infrastructure Benefits Corporation, which is a later agenda item, are present, so we'll call them forward. Is that Alan? Who's that? Okay. All right, so we'll turn it over to microphone 5. I see you're joined by your chair and others as well, so I'll let you take care of that, Irene.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Musqueam people for allowing us to do their work on their beautiful territory. So thank you for letting us be here today. I'm joined by members of my team. I'm joined by Brenda Ireland as well as Katie Shaw, who are working with BCIB on our outreach and engagement in the communities. I'm also joined by Mario Piscitelli. Mario is our Chief Financial Officer for BCIB. I also want to acknowledge that one of the members of our board is present with us here today, is Mr. Michael Bonshore, and Michael is our chair of our Audit, Risk, and Finance Committee. Technology, where's the slide?
Take some clickers there.
Very good. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our organization and what BCIB is doing, and I want to be able to talk a little bit about highlighting the employee journey. But first I'll start by saying what we are not. BCIB is not involved in the negotiations of the project agreements. We are not involved in the negotiations of the impact benefit agreements. What we are involved in is the human legacy of public infrastructure projects. Often when we think of public infrastructure projects, we think about the concrete, the steel, the road, the bridges that are left behind, and they're important infrastructure for our communities. But there is another element that we've not considered, and that is the human legacy. How do we leave behind the important investment in the people of the communities? So I'd like to share a few key stats with you. Indigenous people and women make up less than 5% of the construction workforce. 42% of women face gender-based bullying and harassment on the job site. Indigenous workers tend to abandon jobs because of race-based harassment. Only 1 out of every 45 high school students, that's 1, will choose a career in the building trades, and that is even lower for Indigenous students. So that's what BCIB was created to do. The province wants to support positive change and increase diversity on public infrastructure projects and address a very important labor shortage that this province, as well as the rest of the country, is facing with skilled workers. A tool to do that is the Community Benefit Agreement. It's an upfront investment for the province and the government to mobilize and grow a skilled and diversified workforce. The Community Benefits Agreement has 3 key pillars. The first pillar is around forming a project workforce that is stable and diverse. Developing a skilled trades workforce through increased apprenticeships is the second pillar. And then the third pillar is priority hiring, which is about providing benefits to local communities. So although we're developing strategies to increase the participation of women, new Canadians, persons with disabilities, I'm going to focus on our aspirations to expand the Indigenous workforce. We realize that to be successful is critical that we seek the direction from Indigenous communities, that we take the time to develop relationships and commit to supporting community-based activities. So I want to provide you a bit of a history of how we were formed. In 2017, the government announced the commitment to use a community benefits agreement on select public infrastructure projects. And in 2018, BCIB was incorporated and the community benefits agreement was formally signed. This past year, we have been organizing ourselves with policies and procedures to mobilize the organization, and we became operational this year in Illecillewaet. We currently have 4 key projects in our network. The first is the program on the Highway 1 4-laning program, which is between Kamloops and the Alberta border, the Patello Bridge Replacement Project, and then the Broadway Subway Project. We look forward to other public infrastructure projects that will be added to our curriculum from across the province. So BCIB activities. As I said, BCIB is the Crown Corporation responsible for implementing the Community Benefits Agreement. We're in place to implement a key strategic priority to increase diversity in the skilled workforce in this province. We are looking to mobilize priority hires for work sites and with Indigenous peoples being our priority. Essential is understanding from Indigenous communities' perspective on the systematic, social, and local barriers that make it difficult for members to enter and remain and become ticketed in the trades. We want to understand how we break down the barriers through partnership with existing community initiatives, leveraging assets in the community, and building pathways to long-term careers. So we're about mobilizing, connecting, and enabling. And this wheel is basically takes you through the cycle of service and in the employee journey. So we are committed to learning and connecting with as many local resources and people as possible to ensure that we are providing the workforce development opportunities that we are committed to achieving. We actually need you to tell us. We understand that each community faces their own unique challenges. So we want to be able to build relationships and better understand the inherent strengths and the abilities of the communities and how we can provide more meaningful job opportunities. Priority hiring. So priority hiring is an anchor of the Community Benefits Agreement. It's one of the key pillars. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, less than 5% of BC's construction workforce is Indigenous, yet the Indigenous community is the fastest growing population in Canada. So if we're serious about increasing the skilled labor workforce in this country to address the labor shortage, we absolutely need to be able to continue to connect with your communities. So there is room for growth, and there is absolutely room for diversity in the trades. Part of how we're growing the diversity in the trades is by offering increased apprenticeship opportunities. We are focusing on growing the skill and mobilizing apprenticeship and training opportunities within the public infrastructure projects. And what's unique is that we have a network of projects. So we have an opportunity to intake more apprentices. They have an opportunity to practice their trade, go back to school, return, work on another BCIB project and so forth, which will allow them to journey out and to receive their tickets. We're also focused on changing the culture on the work site. One of the reasons why women and other members of the Indigenous community choose not to stay on the construction site is because they do face harassment and discrimination. And so BCIB is committed to providing each employee with training to support the cultural improvement on the work site and to work alongside with the contractors. This training includes not only orientation to the organization, it includes foundational safety training as well as cultural competency training. And so BCIB is accountable for developing and delivering the cultural competency training to all employees. The training curriculum includes the broader historical context of Indigenous peoples in Canada, but it's complemented by the local Indigenous culture. And the courses are developed in partnership with community, elders, knowledge keepers, and professionals. So we are operational. We've been doing a lot of work to get going, and we're in Illisillouette on the Trans-Canada Highway. These are a couple of members from our team up in Revelstoke. But I just want to give you a sense of what the demographic looks like. We have about 15 employees right now that are working on the construction site this season on this project, and 11 of the 15 employees fall into one of the priority hire categories. So there are 3 Indigenous members, 5 women, 2 trainees, and 6 local residents. So 73% of the entire workforce falls into one or more of the priority hiring categories. So before I conclude, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Brenda, and Brenda will talk to you a little bit more about next steps in terms of working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, and I too want to acknowledge the Musqueam people for allowing us to do our work here today. I just want to give you a little bit of background on myself, just to kind of set the context. I've been involved in Indigenous skills training, employment, economic development for many years. I launched the First Nations Programs and Services Department at BCIT about 25 years ago. I know that dates myself a bit, but and then I've drafted papers for on Indigenous education for the Canadian Council on Learning, for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I've taught adult education classes on the impacts of colonization. I've operated my own business. I was the executive director for the Industry Council for Aboriginal Business for a number of years. And I'm now the advisor for Indigenous skills and employment development for the province's Workforce Development Advisory Group. So I share this with you as the context of, just to let you know, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in Indigenous education for a very long time. And I'm excited to be part of this team because for me and the experience that I have, this is new. This is new because the usual story is the proponent or the government comes in and they negotiate this wonderful IBA and they make all these wonderful promises. And then they hire a prime contractor who proceeds to ignore, or at very best give a less than valid attempt at realizing those commitments. So I see this as that link between what the communities negotiated and what their aspirations were for their people on projects in their territories and what was actually going to happen at the end of the day. So I see this as that missing link, and I'm really excited by that. I'm really excited about the opportunities and the possibilities of working with communities in realizing what it is that they want from these projects in a meaningful way. So one of the things that I find refreshing about the BCIB is that they accept that they know absolutely diddly squat about what it means to engage Indigenous communities. And I think I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because, you know, they have some great guidance at the board level from Mike. And but it's refreshing for me to be part of an organization that really is committed to doing the right thing in the right way and understanding that starts with community direction. And so I'm really, really honored to be part of this. And they're listening and they're learning. They've learned about some of the challenges, and now they want to work with communities to find solutions. And I think what's key there is work with, not come up with. I think that's really an important thing about BCIB. And they're committed to continuing to listen and learn. They're committed to supporting community-based initiatives that prepare Indigenous people for transition into skills development and apprenticeships. They are committed to facilitating the creation of careers in the trades for those who are willing, not just jobs that last a few months. They are committed to ensuring Indigenous cultural competency on the workplace, which means respect, empathy, and openness to Indigenous worldviews, values, knowledge, and experience. They are committed to creating a work environment where an Indigenous employee doesn't show up one day because he or she just can't take one more day of racism. So I think they got the right idea. They're here. They want to know the steps for respectful community engagement. They're committed to developing collaborative approaches and recruiting Indigenous apprentices. As I said, I'm new to the team. I don't know if the ink on the contract is even dry yet, but I'm honored to be part of this team. And for the first time in my experience, I feel that I'm participating in something that has the potential to make a difference. We will make mistakes. You can count on it. We ask for your indulgence. We will flounder. we ask that you provide a supporting hand. We will veer off course. We ask that you guide and teach with all the wisdom and patience your communities have. We realize our success is linked to your community's engagement, involvement, support, and guidance. I look forward to further discussion. Miigwech, Chimegwech.
Thank you. I think we could open it up for questions. Okay.
We have time for a question or two if there are any. Microphone 19, Chief Spahan.
Thank you for your presentation. I just have a few questions in regards to the projects and how the BC Infrastructure Benefits programs work with. In regards to, because you talk about the 3 projects in your handout, how does this, have you been talking with the unions in regards to these major projects, and how is that going to work going into this program? Because yesterday there was a lot of talk about racism and discrimination, and I bring that up because at Highland Valley Copper Mine there's a union there, and when we put our Indigenous people into the work there, the union got pretty upset, and there was a lot of racism and discrimination. So how is this going to work? And in regards to the benefits, and you talk about the projects down here in the Lower Mainland, how is the benefits going to work for our people? Because they say Vancouver is one of the highest places for rent. Gukshtam, thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? Well, I'll start by saying that the unions are partners with us. The unions, there are 19 affiliated unions that are signatories to the community benefits agreements, and it is working because, as I explained, we are currently in Illecillewaet, and they are very much alongside working with us. And I think in terms of our accountability, in this case, BCIB is the employer. We're not hiring people and then turning them over to the contractor to provide the oversight. We are in fact on the job site. We're working alongside with the contractor and ensuring that the values that we're building in our organization are actually being demonstrated on the job site. And cultural competency, when you talk about discrimination and harassment, cultural competency training is the first of its kind in this country, and certainly in this province. And we're doing that not just for our employees, but also for members of the contractors, the leadership, the on-site personnel. So we're trying to create a work site that is very much safe and respectful. And that's not to say that there will not be challenges, because that's the reality, but our responsibility is to engage quickly and to resolve those challenges on the work site. That is our accountability as an organization. And when I say not only are we accountable to our employees, but as a Crown Corporation, we're accountable to the public. So we need to be able to actually report out on how we are progressing and how we are in fact impacting positive change. And then to address the latter part of your question with respect to the Lower Mainland, we're starting our outreach now in preparation for the Patello and the Broadway projects. What I can say is that the Community Benefits Agreement actually provides transparent, competitive wages. So it's equal pay for equal work, and that is in fact contained within the Community Benefits Agreement. Can I add something? Yes, please.
And I think we need to make a statement that the projects that BCIB will be working on is the provinces, are the projects that are going to be provincial projects, so the government of BC projects. So I'm hoping as we move forward on this, we'll be setting some standards. But having said that, I'd really like to talk to you about what's happening. I'm going to take off my BCIB hat and put on my other hat. And if I could speak to you about what's happening at however that would be, I'd like to chat with you about maybe developing some strategies to address that issue. It's not acceptable.
Okay. Let's take the question from 28 and 18, and then we'll turn back for response and final comments.
Indian band in Chicago. I'd like to thank the Musqueam for hosting us here today and presenters. It's a quick question in regards to your program. I see that you have your trades and the training and such, but I have people that already have their tickets and certificates and first-year apprentices and stuff, so I need to know who would they be contacting to present a resume to, and who would they talk to about getting into the trade? So those two questions. Okay. Thank you.
18.
Do you want me to answer it?
Good morning. My name is Michelle Edwards. I'm the chief of the Shekelwash and Kakayitan communities in the St'át'imc Nation. I want to thank everybody for allowing me to speak here and bringing us together. My questions, I guess, around the cultural competency part of it, and I sit with a lot of prime contractors, and they always sit there and go, "You people," you know, and I'm like, should I be saying "you pedophile"? Right? It's a stereotype that that we address all the time, and I think it's something that if we're sitting directly with the prime himself, because they need to get the message to their contractors, to the people on site, that they're not paying them to stand around and be racist and make comments and make judgments. A lot of these contracts, and I know because we're subs on some larger ones, are really about production. And at the end of the day, as an Indigenous woman involved in large projects and being a leader, I have to make sure that at the end of the day, we are having people working, but there's also profits that need to be made so I can invest in my community, invest in our future and those types of things. So I'm hoping that there's very strong language and conversations when it's the people who are in charge of the people on the ground, that it is about production, not about standing around judging people on site. And it has to be from both sides. So I'm hoping that those hard conversations start right from the start, and because I have them right up front. Thank you.
Microphone 5, response and final comments.
Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Is that on? We absolutely have very, very strong language. So not only do we have the cultural competency training, but we actually have the policies around how and when we deal with issues on the job site. We also have an agreement between BCIB and the contractors, the prime contractor as well as the subcontractor, on expectations and roles and responsibilities. We have a very strong bullying and harassment policy, and we just will not tolerate it. If we are serious about changing the work site and attracting new employees, and more importantly, retaining new employees, then we absolutely have to take action. And we have, and we will. And then in terms of your question regarding resumes, Katie Shaw, sitting at the table here today, she's the person to link with, and absolutely happy to take that information and get those people into the database so that we can get them working. Thank you for that. So thank you very much again for allowing us to be here today to speak with you. I look very forward to ongoing conversations, but more importantly, actions, because I think actions are obviously more important than words. And so we look forward to creating and mobilizing and growing a skilled and diverse workforce in this province with your support. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. I want to ask the regional chief to present gifts to our presenters who present on an issue which clearly is, I think, let's call it a valuable and appreciated contribution to the opportunities that our First Nations communities and citizens have, and the positive experiences we want them to have within the infrastructure development and construction sectors. So let us thank them. I think they'll be here for a second, and I noted earlier on infrastructure, you know, there is that sort of, what are the dividing lines? What are the categories of infrastructure? Because infrastructure can be anything, and so when we get a minute, these would be the people's brains we want to pick on that. What are some of those rules of thumb that we could be using when we think of infrastructure in our communities and in and around our communities? All right, so we'll pick up back on the agenda for earlier, the First Nations Gaming Commission. I do want to note that the presenters were here, they just were not readily available when we were in the interesting situation of being about 10 minutes ahead of our schedule, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that they were present and we just couldn't get them here in time, and so we made the quick adjustment. So we are going to be joined by Jay Johnson, the advisor and negotiator with the First Nations Gaming Commission. I think is very familiar to many of you, and I see Judith Sayers is joining them as well. And then he's also joined by Maya Duvage with the BR Law Firm. And as you know, they've done quite a bit of work around the gaming revenue sharing agreement and those negotiations. And so I'll turn it over to microphone 5.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the homelands of the Musqueam and thank them for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to be providing information to you today. You know that we negotiated for gaming revenue sharing for over 30 years. I only was part of the last 13, 14 years. Myself and Catherine Denise, I think, were the longest gaming commissioners that are currently on there. And of course, the good news came last Leadership Council cabinet meetings in November, where the province committed to gaming revenue sharing. So since that time, we've been working hard trying to set up a limited partnership that would be the ones that's going to be giving out the money. The Gaming Commission is not. We were responsible for negotiating the gaming revenue sharing, and we envision as a second step or second phase that we'll be negotiating for casinos and other things. So this is step 1, and there are other steps to come because we know there are other issues out there. So really wanted to thank Jay Johnson and Joe Hall for all their hard work in negotiating and getting the gaming revenue sharing in place. As gaming commissioners, we were only advisors to them, and they did the hard work of negotiations. And so we do have it's a really long name, First Nations Gaming Revenue Sharing Partnership in the room, and our general manager? The general manager is Vanessa West. Oh, Vanessa Sutton. And Vanessa, you want to stand up and... And Mike Bonshore is the chair of the board, and we're all familiar with Mike. And they've been working really hard to get out your packages to you so that you can get your share of gaming revenue October 4th. All the packages went out, you need to sign them and get them in, and in your bank accounts on October 4th will be your first. If you haven't got your packages in, I advise you to get them in really quickly and talk with Vanessa and her staff and make sure you can be part of that. Your shares won't be given to anyone else if you haven't, but you just won't get the money as quick as if you can be ready for that first cut. So we've been working on agreements on the eve of the announcement. We had been trying to negotiate a 25-year agreement with the province so that we would have long-term certainty in gaming revenue, and they came up and said, well, we can't do that. Our legislation doesn't allow us to do that. So They committed to getting legislation through this fall, so the first week of the sitting, they will be tabling legislation that will allow the 25-year agreement. So in the interim, in order to get you money, Jay and Joe negotiated a 2-year agreement, and that money was put into the bank account of the limited partnership, and so it was 196 million. Yeah, that went into that bank account, and that's for 2 years, so only half of that will go out in this year. Yeah, a lot of things have been happening, and you know we're really excited that we were able to see that in our lifetimes. I like the question from the chief yesterday asking about the cannabis legislation and if it was going to take 30 years. I said, right on. I guess that's sometimes the pace of this government. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a broad overview, and you know, as a gaming commission, we'll continue to do some work, but I'm going to pass this on to Jay, and he's going to provide you with some more details and anything that I might have forgotten. Oh, I just wanted to say that Catherine and I were appointed interim co-chairs. We've never really had a co-chair or chairs on the commission, so we need to get organized as well.
Why, Huskell, Squeeze Jay Johnson. It's an honor to be here today on the territory of the Musqueam, and want to be thankful for the hosting us here today. Thanks to the commission and to Judith Sayers and to Catherine Tenise and Grand Chief Joe Hall, who is my partner on the negotiating process over the last number of years, and in particular in concentrated effort with the NDP government to achieve an outcome here that we successfully accomplished. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update in terms of the color of our discussions and give you a sense of timing and so forth. As you know, as Judith outlined in November at the Premier Cabinet gathering, we were able to announce that we've achieved an agreement in principle for the sharing of gaming revenues, and we worked to define the quantum between that moment and the February budget, which we successfully did as 7% of all net revenues. That's something that's locked down now for the next 25 years, and we're in the process of ensuring that that will be delivered in a manner that is as sustainable and appropriate as possible. We were looking at our original deadlines and timelines to be essentially the end of May, early June for the completion of the agreement, which we accomplished. And we had our approvals in place on the Leadership Council side and the 3 PTOs and the commissioners. And then government began the process of approving the agreement themselves. And at the 11th and a half hour after many of the staged approvals, we were told by the Department of Finance that they had an issue with one of the clauses that we negotiated in there, which was the certainty clauses, to essentially define the agreement as 25 years and reduce the termination language so that a future government was not in a position to terminate the agreement during the 25-year period. So we had a very, very strong agreement, and it was an agreement that government was not used to seeing, and it was an agreement that started to throw off the Ministry of Finance, and they had a concern from their legal counsel that they may be in danger of having to book the full $3 to $4 billion in the first year. So obviously that became an impediment to getting the agreement done, and we had to look for alternative solutions throughout the summer. And that delay caused a delay in your communities receiving your portion of the revenues. So what we've come up with is, as Judith suggested, we've now concluded a 2-year agreement that's renewable in the case that the legislation takes a little longer than we expect, but we don't expect that. And those funds were approved in the February budget for 2 years, and those funds have now flowed into our limited partnership, which is your limited partnership, which will be the distributing entity, and they'll be able to flow the funds into your communities on an annual basis. So our work now is to pivot towards ensuring that the government completes its legislation and the legislative changes to the Gaming Control Act to ensure that the next 23 years are in fact enshrined in legislation, and that we have the kind of certainty that we're looking for and that our mandate dictated to us to achieve. So we're working back and forth with government to try to come up with solutions there, and we're told that we're in good shape for the fall session, and we're very hopeful and appreciative of the cooperation that we've had given the snafus at the last minute that we were all forced to address. I just wanted to flag another opportunity in the agreement, which is that we have to identify a First Nations representative on the BC Lottery Corporation, and that essentially is to ensure that we have eyes and ears on the corporation and some of its policies and procedures. And a good example of that is that quite early on during the money laundering investigation, some of those initial costs for money laundering that the government incurred were borne by the gaming file. And we wanted to ensure that that was not borne by you and our communities, and in fact, we were successful in having that shifted elsewhere. So it's those types of issues that would come up during conversations at the board level with the BCLC. So we're quite pleased that we've got official approval to have a designate at the table. Maybe another thing I just wanted to talk about is the phase 2. Once we complete this process, the limited partnership will be distributing your funds. Judith mentioned that the first round of disseminating those funds is expected on or around October 4th. So if you have your approvals and your paperwork done by today, I understand, then you'll be able to receive those funds immediately or in that period, in that October 4th window. But that's not exclusive. So anytime thereafter, you can still submit your paperwork, and I understand that they're targeting now sometime in early November to be the next round of distribution. So don't fear if you don't have your paperwork complete and you need a bit more time to get your BCRs in place and so forth. You will absolutely receive those funds, and those funds will be reserved for you and not spent elsewhere. If there are communities that are going to not be interested in the funding for whatever reason, those funds will be held for up to 3 years, and then they'll be redistributed to the remaining partners and then restarted again. So there will always be funds available for your communities to obtain. In the phase 2 discussions, as Judith says, we sometime after we complete this round and get the legislation through, and we can celebrate the fact that we've achieved the 25-year agreement, we're going to be looking with the government to sit down and negotiate access to gaming opportunities directly around the province. And that would be a tiered approach from larger casinos down to smaller enterprises, perhaps even bingo halls and that type of thing. So we're quite happy about that. There was another accomplishment I just want to highlight that will come out in phase 2, which has been agreed to, which is First Nation community access to community gaming grants. And those are significant. They range from $64 million to close to $100 million a year. And those gaming grants are for purposes of community development, sometimes infrastructure, sometimes sports opportunities and youth development programs and that sort of thing. And so until this moment, our communities haven't been able to access those resources, and that's an additional benefit that we've been able to achieve through our negotiations. So limp for that. And maybe we'll just, right, okay. So as I mentioned, we've got the interim agreement completed. The funds are in the hands of your limited partnership, and we expect the legislation to be completed for the premiers and cabinet gathering in November. Limlimt.
Thank you, Jay. Just want to remind everybody where this was born out of. For many years, our chiefs were talking about gaming revenue sharing with the Liberal government, and really was put to the back burner and was never committed to. One of the things that came out of this with this commitment from the NDP government is that it was a political promise, and they've lived up to it. But the other thing too was what we heard loud and clear from you, the chiefs, was the how First Nations were afraid that if you're taking money out of this game and revenue sharing, that it's going to affect the revenue sharing from forestry or from mining or for something else that they would take, give and take. And we made it loud and clear to the provincial government that we're not going to stand for that these revenues are different compared to forestry and mining and other revenues. The other thing, just a little bit more background, is that the work from the commission and Jay and Grand Chief Joe Hall was to go out to see what the revenue sharing was occurring in other regions, such as Saskatchewan and Ontario. And we looked at all those scenarios, and the one that closest that we adopted was the Ontario formula, which is 50% shares distributed evenly, 40% based on population, and 10% based on remoteness of your community. And the other question that I continued to get was not only where's my money, but what's the reporting and what can we utilize the funding for? And as far as I'm concerned, much of you brought your ideas about funding. Can we use it for housing? Can we use it for languages? Can we use it to take care of our kids? And I really believe that the funding is very unencumbered, and then the reporting isn't that onerous for you to utilize these funds, to utilize it for what you really need it for. And I think that was really loud and clear that the commission heard. So maybe you want to enlighten everybody on some of those types of questions. So thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, just to clarify again, we worked, Grand Chief Joe Hall and I worked quite hard to ensure that we had as much discretionary allocation of these funds, that your communities and your decisions are yours for determining where those funds can advance your community needs and interests. And we try to keep the door as wide as we possibly could. Given that there's an annual disbursement, there's a need to trigger the payment, and that is in the form of a one or two page audited form by your auditor that simply discusses and reports out where the funds were spent that year. And maybe what I'll do is just read out the very general and broad categories of expenditures that are allowed under the agreement, and you'll notice that this is that should encompass just about everything that your communities want to address. So the first is health and wellness. The second is infrastructure, safety, transportation, and housing. The third is economic and business development. The fourth is education, language, culture, and training. The fifth is community development and environmental protection. And the sixth is capacity building, fiscal management, and governance. So the only stipulation that came out of the negotiations that the government required was that direct distribution of the funds to individuals is not permitted. So that's the only real criteria, is as long as these funds are going to advance your community needs in the areas and sectors that you have determined, your communities determined are a priority, then that should be accomplished. Yep.
All right, thank you. So complex, continuing developing agreement, investment, and allocation process that you presented, I think, very well, and presented in a manner that celebrates the achievements that have been accomplished. Demonstrates to everyone that you're keeping your eye on the ball. And I would trust and encourage as First Nations to feel some confidence in further success in the areas that you've identified. I do want to make sure we see if there are questions from the floor. Microphone 13, then, or 14, then 11.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Take this opportunity, Claude Barton, proxy for the Nisga'a village of Gingolas. I want to thank the Musqueam for allowing us to do our business in their territory, and the welcome that we had the past few mornings. Again, thank you for the presentation. As you know, we are one of the 4 communities of the Nisga'a Nation, self-governing First Nation, and our treaty does allow us, and it states clearly that within our own community lands, we're legal entities, and it's been proven time and time again. And I'm of the understanding, with a few conversations that I've had, that our nation had gone forward and had some discussions. I'm still trying to clarify what kind of discussions they had with this committee in regards to our community of Gingolis. I'm really, really interested in applying on behalf of our own community, and I will pick up a form and bring it back to our chief counselor when I get back home and raise these issues with them. I think it's great work that in going forward, but I just want the table to know that as a legal entity, Gingolis Village government, part of the Niska Nation, will be applying. We have every right, as set out in our treaty, to do these things. And again, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. We'll go to a few and then we'll come back to the panel. Number 11.
Good morning, Harold. Good morning, Cookbees, chiefs. Cookbee Christian, Splatsin. A couple of questions. In reading the agreement, it identifies $2 million for startup costs. And I'm trying to understand, is that for 1 year or is that over $2 million per year? And what is was actually being used for? First question. So the second question is around what is the actual amount that's being dispersed in the first 2 years per year, to get an understanding, so the communities get an understanding of what we're talking about, because I think we need to understand, the resources that are being, and that everybody's worked so hard for 20 years. I think it's good work. I think we've had this on our table so long, and it's really good work. I think we need to understand the sort of the impact of this could have in our communities. It would be really useful as well if it was some kind of briefing was sent out to the chiefs and the communities to outline the material, so we can take that information and give it to our members, because we're being asked questions on the ground. They've heard about it, but they want to know, what does this actually mean? And so I think it's really important there's some kind of briefing goes out to the communities that would really be succinct in terms of the information. So I think it's really good work. I think that it really is important to understand the scope and the gravity of this in terms of what it can do for our communities. And so those are the questions I have, and I think that the Leadership Council, the leadership that they've shown on this is, in terms of coordination, is really important. And also the Gaming Commission and all the, Grand Chief Joe Hall, all the people that have worked on this. I remember former Chief Shane Gottfredson was involved in this file. So it's like a lot of people have contributed to bring this to fruition, and it's good work. I think we need to know more about the actual details, and so how that's going to roll out. So, Cookstrom, thank you.
Let's go to Jay on that, and then we'll come back. We'll go here for response to those Gingola-Niska linkages, and then the first 2 years distributions and communications materials, and then we'll come back to microphone 8. Judith?
Okay. Thank you. We have a definition of eligible First Nation, and every First Nation is going to be based on themselves and the population. And we've considered this in light of our definition, and a letter is going out today that will state that the money will be going to the Niska Nation in relation to the definition and your structure, and that it'll be then dispersed to the communities through your government. That's what we've been working on and trying to decide. But it's based on your nation and your nation's population, your remoteness, and all of that is going to be the complete, the 4 of you that will have that. I know that's not what you want to hear, and it's been a difficult decision, but we are trying to respect the governance structure in your treaty. Just in relation to the 2 million, and I want to answer this because I have our consultant. We had been promised that money from the province to be doing all of this negotiations, and that we would be getting that money. And then again, in the 11th and a half hour, they told us that it was not that it had to come out of the funds, and we never wanted that. we had been negotiating to have that a separate fund so that it never came from the First Nations. So that's a one-time thing. It'll, you know, we may have to set aside a bit more money for the negotiations that will be handled again through the limited partnership. So, you know, there were some things that happened at the last minute, and we're still trying to resolve that with the province. We're trying to get more money for negotiations because, you know, it wasn't our fault that at the last minute they had to do legislative changes, and we're hoping there's not that much work to do. So definitely, and, you know, the general partner is going to be very accountable to you as well, and they will be, I don't know if they're holding annual meetings, but there are certain provisions that they will be reporting to the chiefs on the money, where it's going, how it's being dispersed, and it's going to be open and transparent in that way. So they will be doing that. So we don't handle the funds as Gaming Commission, and so Mike's the one that you need to be good friends with. No, just kidding. But they will have that responsibility, and I'll let Jay answer the other part of your question.
Lim. What I would add, thank you, Judith. What I would add to that is that in the context of the disbursement of revenue to the eligible communities, one of the things that the Commission wanted to emphasize is that we weren't creating any kind of incentives or disincentives for nations rebuilding or reconstituting their governance structure. We understand that we need to create the opportunity and the space necessary for each Indigenous government to self-define their governance structure over time. And to that effect, and not be penalized by any changes or shifts, for example, moving from community-based to a more nation-based approach. And so what we've ensured in the case of the Niska Nation is that, and others, as they move forward to their own processes, if nations decide that they want to centralize their governance regime, that they're not going to be penalized by receiving funds as only one community, but they'll be recognized as each of those communities that were originally there and constituted. So the funding profile will be significantly higher than it would be if they moved from 4 to 1 or 5 to 1 or something like that. So it would be based on the original 4 or the original 5 communities, and then the disbursement would go to the central government, and then from the central government into the communities, and that would be an internal conversation. So we wanted to make sure that we recognize that those opportunities exist. What I would maybe add to the conversation about the startup is that the $2 million, we were able to use that for the startup and the building of the entity, which includes the capital costs as well, the building itself, the operating and the staff. And on an annual basis going forward, which I think was one of your questions, Kupi, was that there would be a budget that would come off the top every year annually, and I'm not sure off the top of my head what that is. In Ontario, I think it's just slightly over $1 million that they use to support the infrastructure, and they have a fairly small, lean team, and try to keep those costs down as low as they possibly can. And some of that $1 million is actually in Ontario anyway, is designated for the annual meeting that they host, where they support the travel costs of all the chiefs to attend as partners and as partners within the limited partnership. So that's my understanding, but obviously we'll let the partnership and the board speak to those at another time.
Okay. The other part of the question?
Oh, the disbursement for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that. The first year is $94,840,000, or $840,000.
Each?
No, yeah, each. And then the next year will be $100 million. And we anticipate that there's an annual growth of between 1% and 2%. Our historical data shows that it's more like 3.5% growth over time. There's been significant changes in the gaming industry over the last 10, 20 years. So if that kind of growth continues, then we could see the agreement being worth closer to $4 billion rather than the estimated $3 billion that it is now by the end of the term. So we're very hopeful that everybody gets out there and spends their money and gets that 7% back. So if you lose, you still win.
All right, the other part of that question was some communication materials that could help the chiefs to engage with their community?
Yeah, Maya and I just had a quick whisper conversation here, and we're going to work with the limited partnership to ensure that there's some communication and briefing materials that you could that we can dispense to your communities, or you can access either online, or we could send them out as emails to help you describe what this is and describe what the benefits would be in the communities. And we know from our analysis across the country that the model that we used in Ontario has been very, very successful, and they've done things like eliminated their housing backlog in some communities where they focus just on housing. There have been other communities in the northern Ontario where they've pooled resources for healthcare centers and dialysis machines, and eliminated the need for community members to fly back and forth long distances to get medical attention. There's been purchases of economic enterprises and that have created jobs and new profit into the community. So we're hopeful that that creative thinking will continue in British Columbia, and we'll see a large benefit over time. Limit.
Number 8 and number 19, and then we'll look to see where we're at.
Hello, I'm Don Svanvik. I'm the elected Chief Counselor of the Numgis First Nation. I want to thank the Musqueam for having us on their territory to conduct this business. And I want to thank the Commission for their good work. Thank you. I got to share a little story. The Numgis, like everybody else, we're grossly underfunded, funded minimally for all our programs and services. And we had the young ladies that look after the rec center started Chase the Ace thing a couple years ago. Very successful. They were able to put a bunch of money. I think they actually raised about $100,000. And then the RCMP stepped in and said that we could no longer do that. And if we continue to do that, we're liable for a fine. I think it was up to $500 a day or something like that. And certainly that didn't make us happy in our land. And certainly gaming's always been part of our lives and our history. And we were able to move to challenge it, but we're already in another challenge. And like I mentioned before, we're pretty poor just like everybody else. So I don't know where that sits. Is the gaming authority we have as nations, where that sits in the Commission and how that's being negotiated, and is there a consideration to there being a legal challenge for that? Because I'm sure there'd be, I'm sure I could convince our guys to put that forward if there was financial support. Thank you.
Limlimt. Thanks for that question. There's a story that I recall, and I unfortunately can't remember the community off the top of my head, but when we were probably 5-6 years ago operating as the committee before we rolled into a commission, the transfer from a committee to a commission was for the purposes of starting to define and regulate gaming outside of provincial jurisdiction at that time. And the reason was that we had about 10 or 11 years of banging our heads against the wall with the Liberal government trying to get an audience to get some restitution and justice over this matter of resources flowing into your communities. British Columbia, until this agreement, was the last province in Canada that did not share revenue with Indigenous communities. In the 90s, there was a Supreme Court case that was taken up, I believe, by the Mohawk communities in Ontario and Quebec that challenged the federal and provincial governments in their sole jurisdiction and regulation over gaming and the legitimacy and jurisdiction of it. So that case was, I understand, thrown out on a technicality, but so the question in Canadian law remains a question mark. However, I think there's a pretty strong understanding that if the resources were assembled and the case was presented and it made its way to the Supreme Court, that we would be successful. And I think that's a major incentive and reason why we have these kinds of agreements across Canada right now. That question is still protected. This agreement doesn't surrender or release the province or the federal government in any way for or surrender the gaming authority to the provinces. It just simply captures the revenue flow that they're obtaining right now. So that space is still protected. The story, similar to yours, was communities that were doing pull tabs to try to raise funds for ceremonies and for burials, and they were also shut down by the RCMP. So how we're going to address this here in this initiative is in phase 2, which we anticipate happening in the spring, which we'll be negotiating about how communities get access to participating directly in the gaming industry. And that's on a whole layer of tiers. So whether it's the large casinos near markets, near the big markets, or whether it's smaller fundraising opportunities in any community. So we're trying to find a way that we can have that discussion with the province and find a way that we can streamline access to communities participating directly in those opportunities. So we hope we can have some success in the spring and summer.
19, excuse me.
Lise Behan, Chief of the Coldwater Band. Thank you for your presentation. My question was, because you talked about it being based on population for the band, and I asked this question every time this issue came up, and it's based on per capita. And so within the 25-year agreement, when your population increases, does that money increase?
Yes, that's correct.
And yes, so just the overall money, or
the principal, the overall package of funds that will be shifted to the partnership will be based on 7% of whatever the province brings in, and if it grows, we get more, of course. But how the distribution in the communities go is currently by that formula. And if your population rises, then you'll also accrue additional resources because of that population growth.
And just to be clear on that, in the event that 7% is a much smaller take, and let's say a bad year for gaming across province, then even with a growing population, my number could be lower based upon what that pool is.
Yeah, that's a possibility, yeah.
All right, just to be clear about that. 21?
Good morning. Chief Chastity of Gitwangak, located in Northwest BC. Around the licensing for casinos on reserve, and so Gitwangak put in a request, and we were denied that request because we have a building that we wanted to repurpose for. The community wanted a casino there in one of our buildings. It's probably about as big as this room here, and we were denied that. But we were told that we could have a VLT. So I just wanted to ask what the difference was between a casino and a VLT, so a video lottery terminal. Is that what VLT is? I just wanted to know the difference. Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. The VLTs are just slot machines and digital gambling. The full-fledged casinos have card tables and roulette and other games, as well as a variety of other games, as well as the slot machines. So it's a larger, more encompassing facility, and the share of the provincial revenues that the province obtains is slightly different on card tables than they are for lotteries. Yeah.
22.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Alrita Leask. I'm from the Metlakatla First Nation. My question relates to when you were doing the funding formula calculation, did that include an isolation factor? Because I think I was at a meeting before, and if I remember correctly, there were some additional considerations in the revenue sharing to First Nations with regard to the isolation factor of their community.
Okay, so the money is divided 50% straight line. Every First Nation will get a certain amount. And then 40% is based on your per capita population, and 10% is the remote communities. And we also have a definition that we worked really hard on, looked at many definitions of that, and we came up with our formula. So that's how we're basing it on. That 10% will be granted to those remote communities.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions? Then let us thank the commissioners and the lawyer. I'm not sure if she's on the commission. Is she on the commission? Is she on the commission? No, just support. Yeah, wasn't sure about that. As we're doing that, ladies and gentlemen, we're at 10:50, and so you have a choice. Would you like a break? I see some thumbs up, so let's take a 15-minute break. 15, not 50. All right, a 15-minute-ish break. do a 3-minute notice. We'll get started in 3 minutes. Okay. I think he wants to give you $1,000. Is what I sorted out from that. But it might cost you. So 6 squares left on the draw. They're doing another fundraiser to support the traditional canoe refurbishing. To reconvene. So just as a reminder, the order of the day, we do have the New Relationship Trust presentation and then the National Indian Brotherhood update. So we'll do those 2 presentations, and we also have the climate change, climate emergency survey gifts to be given out, some other gifts, and then we'll turn to the regional chief for our final remarks before we do the closing. As noted, all the resolutions were dealt with by the end of the day yesterday, and so we will likely finish right at the 12 o'clock time, and the lunch is available for you. So if I could, I wanted to note that we are joined by Chance Gamble, the General Manager and the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the New Relationship Trust. As many of you recognize, Cliff Fragan had moved on, and an announcement was circulated that he moved on to a new opportunity in Toronto. And Chance, who's long been with the New Relationship Trust, serving in the Program Manager's role, as serving in that stead as the search for a new executive or CEO carries on. So with that, let us welcome Chance, and here at microphone 6.
Good morning, elders, chiefs, councillors, friends. Appreciate Musqueam allowing us to work in their traditional territory today and on their lands. Today I'm going to provide a presentation about New Relationship Trust. You will find some of the staff from NRT are circulating our annual report, and also the scholarship and brochure award winners If you go through it, you'll probably find some of your community members in there. Explains if they want a bursary or a scholarship. So as Harold said, my name is Chance Gamble. I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm Cree. I moved here about 11 years ago. I got a son who's 8. He's registered with Soda Creek, so I got a little Squepmuk Cree baby. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please let me know. So New Relationship Trust was created in 2006 through a leadership agreement. So Leadership Council and the BC government made an agreement, and it came out of the new relationship envisioned by the government at the time, and this was after the Haida and Taku case. The province provided $100 million to New Relationship Trust, which we invest. And what we make from the investments, we put out in grants to communities. Many of you probably have been funded by NRT. And we also provide scholarships, bursaries, grants to youth, elders, and such. To date, we've allocated $95 million in the last 13 years. And currently our investment fund sits at $88.4 million. So we've done quite well with our investments. We worked our way through the 2008-2010 recession. We had a little bit of a dip at that time, but we didn't lose any money during the recession. We held on and we came out of it on top. Every 5 years, as part of the NRT Act, NRT was created by an act of legislation in the BC legislation in 2006. The NRT Act states that every 5 years we go out and do a review of the NRT Act to see if it still is effective and efficient. We did that in 2011 and in 2016. And NRT also goes out to the communities every 3 years. So we'll go out to 10 regions. We call them the regional engagement sessions. We'll advertise them through as many means as possible. We ask as many people to come out. And also during our regional engagement year, we also meet at the BCAFN, the summit, and the union gatherings and hand out surveys to ask community members and chiefs and councillors in attendance their feelings about NRT, whether we're being successful, where we might be able to make changes. What we found from the regional engagement sessions is that they are happy with where we are providing funding: governance capacity, economic development, education, language, and youth and elders. In the last 10 years, we've also found people are saying that this fund should be available for future generations. And so as a result of that, we've worked to develop spending and investment strategies that will ensure that the fund is available in perpetuity. The mission and vision of NRT, I'm reading off a paper here, I'm supposed to be clicking here, so about that. Mission and vision of NRT. NRT invests in the capacity development and transportation of First Nations governments and their citizens, and the vision, self-determined, self-sustaining First Nations with effective governments and healthy, empowered citizens. The guiding principles, we support First Nations, their capacity development as they pursue individual and communal self-sufficiency, engaging in effective communications and engagement, ensuring fair and equitable access to our services, increasing the investment fund and not duplicating or replacing existing government or First Nations programs. Each year, as part of the Act, each year the NRT board is required to hold a strategic planning session. And at that session, they define how funds will be allocated for the upcoming year. And as I mentioned earlier, the NRT board has developed investment and spending strategies, and so they'll allocate funds based on how well the fund has performed in the markets, how well the markets are performing in general, and then they will allocate funds for the upcoming year. One of the key strategies when NRT was created is that administration would not exceed 2% of the assets under management. So at all times, the amount of money we have invested, we never spend more than 2% of that on our administration. And last year, for the fiscal year 18-19, we were at 1.34. So we're maintaining that. And to be honest, we do run a very tight ship. We probably handle, in the words of 500 contracts, valuations, approvals, sending out checks, corresponding with communities. We do about 500 to 600 checks with 4 staff members. Just to quickly explain the spending strategy, what we've done is we've looked at the investments, how we've done for the past 3 years. We take an average of that, and then that way it's not such an up and down. It's more of it's a softened rolling average. So how the market has done for the last 3 years, we then use that to project for the next year's spending. This slide shows the investment fund's performance. March 2016, we were at 86 million. The year before was a real banner year. 2015 was a great year. So in 2016, we only had a 1.7% increase. March 2017, again, another bounce in the market. We had a 12% increase. March 2018, 3%. Last year, 7%. And right now, at August 2019, we're about halfway through our fiscal year. Our assets under management are holding at 88 million. That includes the funding that we provide for this fiscal year. And so typically, most of the funds go out early on. Our announcements are made in April. Funding usually rolls out in June. We have some monies that flow out later on, September, October, but mostly they flow out at the beginning. And then as our year goes along, we see our market value increase. So since inception, since 2006, the NRT Strategic Fund expenditures for the last 13 years, about 63.9 million has gone to our strategic initiatives. Some of you have worked with your band managers on proposals. Maybe you've sent them in yourself. You self-define what those proposals are. We don't tell you how to create your projects. The projects are funded. We work with tribal councils. Last year, we created a new initiative called the Nation Governance, and I'll speak about the Nation Governance a little bit later, but it's about self-determination projects, helping communities move out from underneath the Indian Act. We continue to work on governance projects that do continue to support Indian Act reporting and responsibilities, but also now with the Nation Governance, we're taking a little bit more of a leap and recognizing our inherent rights. Other initiatives, we work with the federal government, and what we do is we propose projects to them. We feel that because of our current staff structure, we can deliver the programs quite effectively. We'll hire one person, and we'll already have the office space, the accounting firm, and the management in place. And so really, we're just paying for one person. We have a couple projects I'll explain later. The BC Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative. Last year, we completed a pilot project with regard to the Economic Development Support Team, where we sent out Aboriginal business consultants to work with communities in the community. Communities paid $1,000 just to go through the process, but in the end, they'd get 20 or 30 days free with that consultant. Investment fees, over the last 13 years, we've spent about $5 million in investment fees, and our administration, we're just under $1 million a year. So for this current funding year, 2.4 million is capacity governance, and I'll go through some of those projects later on. Economic development, just under 900,000. Education, This is for scholarships and bursaries. I'll also talk a little bit about the NRT Foundation, which is a separate entity. We created that in 2011. We have a couple board members in the office, and I'll point them out later on. Language at $200,000 and youth and elders at $500,000 for a total spend of about $4.8 million this year. In governance capacity, our primary project that we fund is called direct support. Direct support, you approve BC First Nations for policy and governance projects up to $25,000. And if 3 or more communities want to work together, we'll fund up to $50,000. Projects include policy development, feasibility studies, and other capacity development for First Nations governance. We also have funds for tribal councils. There are still some funds available for tribal councils right now. I think we have funded 5 to date, so we have 5 remaining. So if you have a tribal council that's looking at doing a project, now would be a great time to contact us. We approve the tribal councils and nation councils to support policy development and to promote information and resource sharing among the councils. Earlier on, I mentioned the self-governance, self-determination fund that we provide. It's called Nation Governance. We just launched that last year. We provide $500,000. That's for communities, funding up to $25,000. Projects include research, exploration, and practices of First Nations rights and title to advance your authority and jurisdiction over your lands, resources, citizens, services in a modern era context. Some of the projects may include taking traditional laws and converting them into modern day laws, and how do you ensure that those laws can be applied to people in your territory. We also work with the Indigenous Technology Council, the First Nations Tech Council. We help them create the web portal, the Resource Center website, and we continue to provide them with resources. So when a project is completed by someone we funded, we ask that community to also allow us to share it with the Resource Center, and then they post it on their website. So it's a great source of information for a company or a community that's looking to do a new project. Under economic development, we have a relationship with the Aboriginal Capital Corporations, the Aboriginal Financial Institutions, same name pretty much. What we do is we provide $600,000 to them. We support First Nations businesses by providing cash equity matching funds. By that, it's if an entrepreneur has $5,000, they go to the AFI, they apply for a loan. If they're approved, the AFI will refer them to us, and we will match that $5,000 with a free grant. So really it's $5,000 in your pocket. What that does is it helps the AFIs to lend out more money, and it helps the company with reducing a little bit of risk. If you have a community-owned business, so if it's a First Nations-owned business, we will match up to $25,000. Again, that's through the AFIs. There's 5 in BC. Each has its catchment. And if you're interested in that, let me know, and I can speak to you afterwards and let you know what your AFI and your catchment is. Earlier on, I mentioned that we have a foundation. New Relationship Trust was created by legislation as a nonprofit corporation. We are not a charity, we're not a society. We felt that it was important to go out to talk to corporations and to individuals with wealth to help them find an opportunity to help Indigenous students. So we created the NRT Foundation. The job of the foundation is to seek additional funds for scholarships and bursaries. In the audience, we have the chair of the NRT Foundation, Judith Sayers. Judith, you want to raise your hand real quickly? And we also have a new board member, Mike Bonchor, who's at the back, waiting for his picture to be taken behind the backdrop. Good to see you, Mike. So with the foundation, the work that it's done, it's gone out to seek additional scholarships and bursaries. As a result of creating the foundation, we've tripled the amount of money we give out annually. NRT gives about $600,000 in scholarships and bursaries. The partners that the foundation has created have delivered about $1.2 million annually. So we're now giving out about $1.8 million each year in scholarships and bursaries, and we're one of the largest in Canada when it comes to doing that. When the Indigenous Business Awards, the BC Indigenous Business Awards was first created, we were one of the key partners in that, and we continue to support them at $25,000. And each year, NRT also does 2 events. One is a golf tournament that we do on the Musqueam lands at the BC Golf Course, and quite often Musqueam wins the golf tournament, so pretty much we're paying them to come golf with us. And we also do the Young Entrepreneur Symposium. The Young Entrepreneur Symposium is the only event that we do that's national. And we do it such that one year it's in Eastern Canada and the next year it's in BC. This is the year that again it's in BC, and I'll talk a little bit about it next. So for the past 15 years, the Young Entrepreneur Symposium has brought together about 150 Indigenous entrepreneurs who are introduced to business leaders and role models. For 3 days, they compete against each other in teams. And what we do is we separate the youth. We separate them from their community, friends, and family. We introduce them to new people from across Canada. And so they have brand new people to meet. And they have teams of 8 to 10. They compete against each other. Each year, they work with a production team to create a commercial. And this is done in 3 days. And so we have a professional production team that helps each team develop a 15-minute commercial. And there are also other challenges. It's 3 days of packed excitement. So if you have any youth between the ages of 19 and 30, my suggestion is you get them to contact the NRT. There are opportunities for them to participate in this event. What I've heard from people who have participated in YES is that it's one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting, youth conference in Canada. The event's taking place November 18th to 21st here in Vancouver, and the registration is found at yes2019.ca. Again, if you're interested in more about this, I can speak to you afterwards. I mentioned education as one of the initiatives that we fund. We provide scholarships and bursaries at $600,000 a year. Scholarships and bursaries are available to First Nation students in BC who attend an accredited post-secondary institution on a full-time basis. To date, NRT has provided over $8 million to scholarships and bursary awards. With the foundation, that number jumps to over $11 million because of the partners that the foundation has brought in. We also provide kindergarten to grade 12 program. We got $250,000 this year. Funded project support initiatives that increase First Nations high school graduation rate. Communities come to us with the projects. We don't define what the projects are. We just ask that the projects focus on the 3 tough areas: English, math, and science. It could be tutoring, books, you need laptops for your tutoring sessions, that type of thing. NRT Foundation, I spoke about it a little bit earlier. The foundation is arm's length. They have their own board. Along with working with NRT, I also work with the NRT Foundation in an acting executive director role. And really what I do is I work with the one staff member who does the fundraising and the board to ensure that the board meets their Society Act requirements. The board has been very diligent. Quite often they're fitting us into their very busy schedules. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart. It's all volunteer. There's no funding for it. We greatly appreciate the work that they do. The goal of the foundation is to create a $30 million endowment fund. By creating the $30 million endowment fund, the foundation would be allowed to work in perpetuity, be here forever, giving out about $1 million in scholarships and bursaries a year, plus also meeting their administration requirements. As a result of that, the funding that NRT gives to the foundation for scholarships and bursaries, we could then reallocate towards governance capacity initiatives. So there's a two-strategy approach to the foundation. One, increase scholarships and bursaries through partnerships, and then also through the endowment to free up that money that the NRT spends on education so that we can increase the amount that goes to capacity development. This past year was the 9th annual golf tournament. To date, the tournament has raised over $250,000. The foundation and NRT combined have given out 2,377 education awards, totaling about $11 million. We support youth and elders as well. One of the things that happened a while back is someone said, you know, like elders, like they're well established. We should cut our funding to elders and reallocate it somewhere. Well, fairly quickly that was a bad idea because the elders called the chiefs and the chiefs called us and the chiefs called the leadership council. So we never ever cut elder funding again, just so you guys know. That's going to be there forever. We provide the projects at about $2,500 for youth and $2,500 for elders, and each have a budget of $250,000 a year. The youth come to us with their self-defined projects, and the elders do as well. Quite often, the elders will say they want to use the funding to travel to the elders gathering, and so what we do is we ensure that those funds get to them as quick as possible so that they can make their trip plans. We do provide funding for language. Right now, we're working with a youth language initiative. We've just piloted it last year. We're looking to see how well it works. We're providing $200,000. And so the youth come to us with a project idea, potentially working with the elders in the community, and it's their self-defined project. And we'll fund that one at up to $4,000. And there are still some youth language funds available. So if you have any interest in creating a youth language project, please contact the office. Earlier on, I mentioned that we have a relationship with the federal government, and this year we actually expanded that to be with the province as well. So we work with the feds and the province to deliver the Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative. That provides support and capacity building funds to Indigenous communities working on clean energy projects. Funds are provided for planning, implementation of clean energy projects such as hydro, wind, biomass, solar, marine, and geothermal projects. The Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative also targets energy efficiency projects and energy storage, as well as assists some remote communities in reducing dependency on conventional diesel power generation. We just had that project close recently, and we just did the announcement. I think we're in the multi-million dollars of announcements each year now. One of the things we first did when NRT was created is we wanted to make sure we were fully transparent. There are questions as where did the money go? So what we do is each year, at the end of the fiscal year, we update our funding map. And our funding map is shown on our homepage. So if you're interested in where the funding has gone, whether or not your community has received funds lately, you can click on the buttons. The black buttons imply that there's more than one community. You click on it, and then you'll get a little menu of the communities under that. The red buttons are individual. And when you click it, it'll show direct support, whether or not you participate in a tribal council initiative, nation governance, youth and elders, and also we'll list if any of your community members received a scholarship or bursary. We won't list their names because that'll be very massive. As you can see from the scholarship and bursary award brochure, we're funding quite a few each year, so the list would be massive. One of the ways that NRT reports, and this is built into the NRT Act, which defines us, is that we report out each year to the Leadership Council, to the First Nations, and to the BC government. We include our audited financial statements in our annual report. Our fiscal year ends March 31st. By mid-July, we're meeting as a board to review our audited financial statements. And by August 1st, our annual report is posted onto our website. So each year by August 1st, you can see NRT's financials and also a description of how the funds were used. Our board of directors are 7 individuals, 2 appointed by the Leadership Council, 2 appointed by the province, and 1 member each by each of the Leadership Council groups. So BCAFN, the Summit, and the Union each appoint 1. You can see here that 2 appointments from the Leadership Council is Miles Richardson. Miles was appointed in December 2016, and David Jimmy, who was appointed August 2014. This is the year that the Leadership Council will appoint or reappoint their directors. And so I believe the Leadership Council will be sending out a notice of these positions coming up, and those terms end November 30th. And so by December 1st, we may have renewed 2 directors, or we may not. With the Leadership Council, they have a 2-term limit for the board, and so right now, both of the directors have not reached their 2-term limit. I've tried to go through this as quick as I can. I hope I didn't speed through it too fastly. I know you guys are very busy. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on our website. And I'll leave up on the board a quote from Regional Chief Terry Chiji that we've included in our provincial proposal. We've gone back to the province pretty much every year asking them for additional funds so that we can expand the project funding that we give. And to date, we have not received those funds, but we still keep pushing the province quite hard.
Thank you very much, Chance, for the thorough review and a reminder for many of the delegates of the work that you've been doing over the last decade plus. Are there any pressing questions for the NRT? And if there are not, I would propose to move to thank Chance for his presentation and move to our final presentation for the day. Microphone 19, Chief Spahan.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm just reading in your Entrepreneurs Equity Matching Initiative and Community Equity Matching Initiative. Can you explain what the Native Fishing Association is?
The Native Fishing Association is one of the groups we reached out to at the beginning when we were creating this. NRT doesn't give out loans. So we're really a tight office. And we don't duplicate funding or project services. So we decided if we're going to give out matching grants to help with businesses, we decided we'd work with the institutions that are already in place. So All Nations Trust, Talahealth, Aboriginal Capital Corporations, and there's a couple other, and I'm pulling a blank. Native Fishing Institution was one of them. And they can come to us and say, there's a potential person here that we're willing to give a loan to, and we'll work with them on that.
Anyone else? With that, then, let us join together and thank Chance for that update. And I can tell you on a quick Google that the Native Fishing Association is at 100 Park Royal, so it's in the Black Tower. I don't see a particular... Okay. Moosomin, Manitoba? Okay. All right, so then let us turn to the presentation on the National Indian Brotherhood update. There was a table out front, and some of you may have dropped by to pick up their annual report and their brochure. We're joined by the CEO, Arnold Blackstar, who joined the organization in July 2018. He had a background in First Nations post-secondary education and training, work with the Government of Ontario, and a group called Canada World Youth. You'll note on the agenda that Chief Rebecca David, who is your appointment as one of the trustees on the board, wasn't with us earlier, was unable to be with us today, and so we just wanted to thank her for her work and acknowledge that. Over to microphone 5, please help me welcome Arnold Blackstar, the CEO.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here today to present to you about the National Indian Brotherhood Trust Fund. I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Musqueam First Nation and also send greetings to all of you for today. So just a little bit of a background on the NIB Trust Fund. It was created in 1975 by the National Indian Brotherhood, and at the same year, as a trust, but also at the same year, it was also registered as a charity with the Canada Revenue Agency. In 2009, the trust was amended to add the ability to also fund education programs, reconciliation initiatives, and also to address the legacy of Indian residential schools. Healing and reconciliation became part of the work of the National Indian Brotherhood Trust Fund. Beginning in 2015-16 fiscal year, the court approved the transfer of the designated amount fund from the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to be transferred to the NIB. At the time, it was $167 million in 2015-16. Today, that fund is now at $207 million. That's currently invested through 4 investment managers. The funding opportunities that are available through the NIB Trust Fund are basically in 2 categories, groups and organizations and individuals. In the groups and organizations, we have essentially organizations that are First Nations or Métis governments or communities that are listed as qualified donees under the Canada Revenue Agency, or a First Nation or Métis nonprofit organization or society that is listed as a charity under the Canada Revenue Agency. And the purpose for that is that under the terms and conditions and the administration plan that was approved by the court under the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, we can only give to charities or qualified donees under that arrangement. For individuals, then, we also fund directly individuals for scholarship, bursaries, and awards. The individual is a First Nation or a Métis citizen, 18 or over, with a social insurance number, accepted and enrolled in a post-secondary institution, accepted or enrolled in a short-term accredited training program. It could be a technical college, it could be a 2-day professional development program, or a person that is seeking cultural, traditional knowledge, language training, or even healing from a traditional knowledge keeper or an elder. So we also fund those through the awards process. So in terms of the numbers of what we're currently doing in British Columbia then, in groups and organizations, since 2015, we had a total of 289 applications. The value of those applications was around $23.6 million. So from First Nations communities across the country, or the province. So the NIB was able to support about $5 million to 61 projects in British Columbia since 2015-16. And how that relates to on a national level for the same period of time, thank you, for the same period of time is that we had over 1,200 applications from across the country at around $167 million was the request. We were able to fund only 343 projects at around $26 million since 2015-16 for groups. For individuals, then, what that means is that since 2015-16, we've had over 1,700 applications from across the country, with around $23 million was the request in BC. the NIB Trust Fund was able to support $2.1 million in BC to about 355 individuals pursuing their education. On a national level, what that is compared to is then across the country, we had over 9,400 applications from individuals that amounted to about $106 million in terms of the request for funding. We, as a trust fund, then we were only able to support 2,600 individuals at approximately $12 million. So that's sort of the scale of the work that we're doing on a national level. So for this year, then, in 2019-20, so we had 28 applications from groups and organizations in BC that requested around $6 million this past year. And as well, the total, we were able to support about 1.4 million to about 15 projects in British Columbia. For individuals this year, then, we had 220 applications from across the province at around $1.9 million was the request. We were able to support just over $560,000 to about 142 individuals pursuing education in BC. So for groups and individuals, when we look at the overview since 2015-16, the bulk of the requests have been around culture, have been around language strategies. It's been around healing and reconciliation activities by communities and organizations, and those delivering education and employment programs for First Nations in BC. There's also a family reconciliation or reconnection program that we funded this year, and as well as youth-focused activities in BC. When you look at the total number of Indian residential school survivors participating in these programs, is just over 1,600 individuals. First Nations is over about 8,000, Métis about 258, and then roughly about just over 1,000 in other individuals attending the same programs. So for individuals, what that means since 2016-17, we have not had an opportunity to include the 2019-20 numbers. They've just been recently approved. In terms of scholarships, then we're looking at the PhD doctorate level. The total amount was around 27 individuals. Master's, undergraduates, diploma, and certificate programs under the university systems, and then you'll see the numbers that we are funding there. In terms of bursaries, we're looking at general studies and college studies, apprenticeships, diploma, and then certificates under those programs. Those are the short-term programs. There's been about 65 of those in the last, since 2016-17. And then again, for awards, what we call for cultural training, language training, and as well as for healing and for individuals, we funded over 110 here in BC. The NIB Trust Fund is governed by 11 trustees that are designated by the regional chiefs across the country. The designations then are approved by way of appointment by the Executive Council of the Assembly of First Nation. For BC here, Chief Rebecca David is the current trustee. Each of the trustees serve 2 terms of 3 years, and then a new trustee is designated. The chairman of our trustee is Keith Martell, and he is currently appointed by the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nation. The NIB Trust Fund then, in terms of our calls for applications, there's 2 a year. For groups, the call for application opens in November and then closes in January. And for individuals, it opens in April and it closes in June. So the next call is actually in a couple of months, and it'll close in January for decisions to be made by the end of March. And then again, for individuals, it'll be for next April for decisions to be made by the end of August. So that's sort of our timelines each year. Our audited financial statements are available on our website, and as well as our annual report is also available on our website. And there's lots of annual reports in the hallway there if you want to pick up a copy, as well as brochures on information for applying. We also have those. We have our email and our website for more information. We also feature some of our recipients of the funds for groups and individuals on our website. You can go and find them there. We're also available on our social media that you could find there as well. So that is sort of a brief presentation on behalf of the National Indian Brotherhood Trust Fund, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Arnold. That was indeed brief, 10 minutes, so really appreciate that. Are there any questions? And as we're looking, how do you communicate to potential applicants?
So, so we recently did a review of how we communicate out. One way is our website, our social media, but we also are present at the Special Chiefs Assembly in December, and again at the Annual General Assembly in July of each year to speak directly to chiefs and councils. But also as well, we do public service announcements through community radio stations. So we distribute a radio ad to community radio stations that we have listed currently, and that's one way of communicating. But in the past as well, we've done faxes to band councils, tribal councils throughout the country, and we do it that way as well.
Are there any questions for Arnold? Seeing none, let us thank him for his presentation.
Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to report that we have worked our way through the 20-plus topics and the 40-plus speakers, adding a few along the way, and the 25 resolutions that you brought forward. And so the business that I was asked to conduct is now completed, and I want to thank you for the privilege of having being the meeting's helper, which is my goal as a facilitator. I will now turn you over to your regional chief for closing remarks, and we have a community member from Musqueam, John Stogan, who will help us with a closing song. Regional chief? Oh, and we have some draws.
Thank you, Harold. Let's give it up for Harold. Once again, doing a great job. As a token of our appreciation, I do have a gift for you here. Deneza, Tsekuza, Skyza, chiefs, hereditary chiefs, delegates, proxies, 40 speakers. We heard from approximately a dozen of our societies here in British Columbia, and there are approximately 27 of those First Nation societies here in British Columbia that represents our people. And I just want to thank and give acknowledgement to those that spoke over the last 3 days. It was an ambitious agenda. I'm glad that you're all here still, listening to the updates from not only our regional organizations, but our national organizations. We've heard from many reports in regards to what's affecting our region in British Columbia in regards to our relationship with the provincial government and the federal government. I want to acknowledge my sister organizations, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the First Nations Summit, in the work that we do as three groups as a First Nations Leadership Council. And I want to be clear that we're not the rights holders. You and your people are the rights holders. And really our job is mandated by you to create the conditions so that you can go forward with your proper governance to really assert your governance and your ability to govern yourselves. In particular, I want to acknowledge the work of my two counterparts on some of these working groups that we work on, Cheryl Casmer and Cookpee Judy Wilson, in terms of the child welfare legislation, and also the upcoming United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People legislation, the provincial legislation, and the good work that they've done. In my absence in some of those meetings, that they continue to bring up those issues. And also the other executives at the Leadership Council. The reinstatement and the new 3-year term that Grand Chief Stuart Phillip will be carrying forward, as well as Don Tom, and also for the First Nation Summit. In the interim, who stepped away, Lydia Whitson, who's running for the Green Party, and also Robert Phillips. I want to thank all of you, of the chiefs that have stepped forward and continue to advocate on our behalf. Chiefs councils from the AFN, a few of you are here. Chief Michelle Edwards for the First Nations, the National Fisheries Committee, Dalton Silver is on that committee, and a number of you that have put your name forward to advocate on BC's behalf on some of these organizations. I also want to acknowledge my board, the 5 chiefs, Chief Willie Blackwater, Chief Charles Mormon, Chief Harvey McLeod, Chief Rebecca David, Chief Marilyn Slett, for continue to assist me as your regional chief and helping me in terms of bringing forward our issues in this region that we call British Columbia. I want to acknowledge my 2 elders, Dr. Gwen Point and Dr. Robert Joseph, who couldn't be here because of various reasons, but I certainly acknowledge their assistance. And the 2 outgoing youth representatives, Johnny Hanius, I thank you for your advocacy on behalf of BC, and Angela, who has decided to step away. So there will be an expression of interest coming out in the next week if you do know some youth that want to bring forward their names for youth representative. I think, we're in a unique time here in British Columbia. We do have the relationship, the good relationship with the provincial government, where we can create conditions that are really positive for our people. We have the upcoming meetings here in Musqueam in this building with the Union of BC Union Chiefs and the First Nation Summit. But never forget that we do have in the next couple of months the chiefs and cabinet meetings that will be coming up, so we could bring forward several of our issues that affect us with the provincial government. The changes within the federal government that possibly you might see on October 21st, Election Day. Yesterday we heard from candidates from the Green Party, from the NDP, from the Independent Party, if you will, independent candidates, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, and also the Liberal government. We did not hear from the Conservative government, but nevertheless, I really, if our people are going to vote, we need to make an informed decision in your specific ridings. Need to understand and know where those parties stand, need to know your candidate, and make a wise decision if you do decide to vote. So it's really important that on October 21st that we come out and vote, and we do have several Indigenous candidates that are running for various parties. And as I go to my executive meeting next week, I'm in the unique position in the AFN to uphold several of these files, economic development, fisheries, justice, and amongst other files that other regional chiefs do hold, that I do advocate on your behalf on our position as British Columbia. We're a diverse group here in BC. We have well over 30 different nations, languages, which makes up well over 60% of Indigenous languages in Canada. We have various agreements. We have historical treaties, numbered treaties, Douglas treaties, modern treaties. We have recognition of title. We have First Nations asserting their rights and their title in regards to having no agreement with the provincial or federal government. And I really believe that in British Columbia, as diverse as we are, we certainly work as a unit and as a group, leading the way, leading this country in terms of our rights, title, interests, and also treaty rights. So I appreciate all of you being here today and over the last 3 days. And thank you. And it's been an honor and a privilege to serve you over the last couple of years. And since I was elected in 2017. And I do see a hand up. Lee, microphone 19.
Thank you. I just have a question, and it was in regards to yesterday and in the presentations and in the candidates forum. You know, I left the meeting yesterday upset and disappointed because after the candidates forum done their presentation and you know, when it came time to do questions, the chiefs in assembly were cut off. And I find that unacceptable. Because the reason we come to these assemblies is to ask our questions. One of the main reasons I came to this assembly was to listen to the candidates, but ask them questions. 3 times yesterday I was cut off. And I want to know how that can be changed. Because as the leader of my community, I have to go back to my membership and say, well, guess what? They cut me off and I couldn't ask you a question to those candidates. So I think something has to change here at the BCAFN when it comes time to do questions. Because I did speak with other leaders who had their hands up and they were saying the same thing as me. I also spoke with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip and he said the same thing too. They should be allowing you to ask your questions when it's a forum like this. I know in my community, long time ago, our ancestors never left the meeting. Sometimes they went on for 2 weeks before everything was settled. And I was told yesterday, it doesn't matter how long the meeting has to go, everybody should be allowed to ask their questions. So I think that needs to change because this is the second BCAFN where I had to bring it up, where chiefs are being cut off. And I find that unacceptable. So with that, Kukshem.
Thank you. I certainly accept the responsibility for that issue in terms of the amount of time that has been allocated. And we did put in an hour and 20 minutes for our candidates, and perhaps we should have just expanded that time to allow for more questions. And perhaps maybe one of the things that we should have been looking forward to was maybe had a poll or some sort of questions on the side here so we could bring up those similar questions to the candidates so they're aware of what they should expect and what type of questions so they can be prepared to answer those questions. So certainly something that we need to look at. It's never perfect, and I certainly know that this issue has come up not only here but at the other meetings as well. So I think certainly I look to my staff and let them know, well aware of things that we could do better for the next meeting that we hold as a Special Chiefs Assembly, which will be in some area in British Columbia outside of Vancouver. So your note is taken. Well, it's never easy to answer that question because everybody has their different meetings that they have to go to, but certainly I take that question at heart, and I'll certainly try to do something about it. Thank you. So thank you for attending these 3 days. And that was ambitious with the amount of speakers that we had, well over 40 speakers, and well over a number of topics, 25 topics. We do have some gifts. Maybe we'll do the draws and then have a drumming for everybody to go home in a good way. So let's do the draw for the, we have 4? pass it here? It is some artwork, a ladle, carved eagle. James Nelson, come forward. Some nice silver work. Audrey Mays, is she still? AFN? Sure, we'll take it to her. So tickets to the Argonauts and BC Lions, Joan Brown. Tickets, Joan Brown. We can deliver it to her. More tickets to the BC Lions, Calgary Stampeders. Angie Bailey. And
We could attend the game and report to her.
yeah, yeah, I'll report to her. BC Lions versus Calgary Stampeders. Judy Wilson. Is she here? We'll send it to them. Okay.
For the climate emergency survey with the iPad. Draw name.
Climate change iPad, Joe. We got the iPad here. Jerome Jack. Jerry Jack. There you go. You get an iPad. I'm like Oprah Winfrey. You get an iPad. You get an iPad. So this is the $5,000 BCAFN Climate Survey grant. Jerome Jack? No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
Quaquille for First Nation. Quague First Nation.
And of course, we're all happy for the Quague First Nation.
Quague.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Let me just call.
So to carry us off in a good way before we have lunch, John Stogan, are you here? Oh, here we go. To drum us out and I really want to acknowledge the Musqueam people for allowing us in their territory, and also the Cooks and Musqueam people, the Coast Salish people, for being great hosts. I certainly appreciate being here and for them allowing us being here. So I just want to thank them. John. Thank you, and safe travels home. We do have lunch here. Masai.